B'siyata d'shmaya, we're going to learn Rosh Hashanah Daf Yud Beis. We're going to start approximately in the middle of Daf Yud Beis Amud Aleph. The Gemara is taking us back to the Mishnah on Daf Beis Amud Aleph, that the Mishnah says one of the things which the first of Tishri marks the beginning of the year is le'yerokis, for vegetables. We have to know what this means. Now we know that vegetables, one has to take trumas and maisros, as one does with fruits, as one does with grains, as one does with other things that grow, other fruits and vegetables that grow. And to take maisa, what does that mean? You take a percentage. Truma is approximately 2%. It's a discussion we're not going to have now. Then maisa is exactly 10%. There's different types of maisa. There's maisa rishon that's given to a Levi. There's maisa sheni that has to be taken to Yerushalayim and eaten betara in Yerushalayim. Then you've got maisa oni, which is given to the poor people. Different maisras. And how do you take maisa? You have a harvest, you take a percentage. Maisa is always 10%. It's from the word eser. You take 10%, and that's the maisa, whichever maisa it is. Now, 10% means of a harvest, of a heap, of a field, however you're going to measure it. But can you take the produce, the fruits of a few years together, pile them up and say, here, I'm taking 10%, it's maisa? The answer is no. Every year has to be taken, has to be maised, has to be tithed on its own, year by year. And the last year's fruits, last year's harvest is called Yashon, it's old. This year is Chodosh. One cannot take maiser, Chodosh from Yashon or Yashon from Chodosh. Every year has to be taken on its own. The question is, at what point does the year start? Says the Mishnah on Daf Beis Amud Aleph, it starts on the 1st of Tishri. So if something became chayev in Meiser on Erev Rosh Hashanah, and something else became chayev Meiser on Motzei Rosh Hashanah, then those two are two different years, and Meiser has to be taken independently. Says the Gemara, Tana, we learnt in a Brisa, le'yerokis, that the 1st of Tishri is a Rosh Hashanah le'yerokis, exactly as it says in our Mishnah. But the Brisa says something else. It says ulemeisrus, for Meiser also. Interesting. We just explained that Yerokis means for maestras. The Gemara is going to discuss that. Ule nedorim, and we'll soon see in the Gemara what that means. A neder is if a person makes a promise, he makes a vow, he swears that, as we'll see that in the halachas of a neder, the beginning of a year is Rosh Hashanah. Says the Gemara that le'Yerokis ma'ininu, when the Brisa says that the Rosh Hashanah of Yerokis is the 1st of Tishri, what does that mean? Answers the Gemara, Meiser Yerek. As we explained, it's the Meiser that one takes from vegetables. Says the Gemara, Hainu Meiserus. That's Meiserus. How can the Brisa mention Yerokis separately and Meiser separately if it's the same thing? If Yerokis is Meiser on vegetables. Answers the Gemara, Tana derabonon uktoni doiraisa. Because some things one has to take Meiser min haTorah. For example, grains. Other things, other vegetables, the meiser is only midrabanon. It's not min haTorah. So the Brisa, to impress on us that the 1st of Tishri is the Rosh Hashanah, also regarding grains, which is chayev in meiser min haTorah, and also regarding vegetables, the Brisa mentions also yerokis, which is derabanon, and also meisrus, which is min haTorah, referring to the dogon, to the grains. Tana derabanon, the Brisa first mentions the derabonons, and then uktoni doiraisa mentions the doiraisa. Asks the Gemara of Elisni Doiraisa Bereisha, why don't you mention the Doiraisas, the Chiyuv Min HaTorah, the grains first, before the vegetables? Does the Min HaTorah not have precedence over the Derabonons? It should come first. Answers the Gemara, no. Aida de Chavivale Akadma. We find this in many places, that things that are Derabonon, because they're Derabonon, something which Al Chachomim deduced and something which Al Chachomim introduced, we have we're especially fond and especially close and dear to us, and therefore it's mentioned first. Not chas v'shalom to undermine the doiraisas, but there's a certain chavivus in the derabonons, which is why they're mentioned first. Says the Gemara, but Tana Didon, let's get back to our Mishnah. In our Mishnah, it only mentions Yerokis. It doesn't mention Meistrus at all. Why not? Answers the Gemara, Tana Derabonon. Our Mishnah that mentions Yerokis indeed is only referring to the Meiser Miderabonon, the Kolshkin Doiraisa. And the Mishnah takes it for granted that you'll understand that Kolshkin, that the Meiser Min HaTorah, the Rosh Hashanah is also on the 1st of Tishri, and the Mefarshim explain that the Ritva explains that Rabbanons generally are made in similarity. Kol de Tikkun Rabbanon ke'en d'oraisa Tikkun are similar to their biblical counterparts. And since Meiser Midrabanon is probably made similar to the Meiser Min HaTorah, if we see that Meiser Midrabanon, the year starts on the 1st of Tishri, it was probably taken from that halacha in Doraisas, that Meiser Dogon, the Meiser of grains, the Rosh Hashanah starts on 1st of Tishri, and therefore we can deduce the Doraisa from the Durabanon. Continues the Gemara, that we just saw in the Brisa, Maisrois, and we just said it's talking about the biblical Maisros. The 1st of Rosh Hashanah marks the new year. Asks the Gemara, why do you speak about Maisrois in plural? V'lisne Meiser, just say Meiser in single tense. Says the Gemara, no, because the Gemara is trying to impress on us that there's two Meisers, and they're both Min HaTorah. Echod Meiser Behema, one is the Meiser Behema from the Toher Tzoinu Bokor, the Toher animals that one has to take every 10th, not every 10th, one has to take a 10th of the animals, and one has to separate them as Meiser, and it's brought similar to Bechor, it's brought to Yerushalayim, it's brought as a korban, discussed elsewhere, but there's a halacha of Meiser Behema, ve'echod Meiser Dogon, and the Meiser taken from grains is also called Meiser, and both of those together are Meisros plural. Asks the Gemara, okay, v'lisni Yerek. Okay, but the Mishnah and the Brisa, when it speaks about vegetables, it says Yerokois in plural. Why doesn't it just say Yerek, a vegetable? Any vegetable, but why Yerokois? Answers the Gemara, because even Yerokois, Trei Gavna Yerek, there are two different categories and brackets of vegetables that are chayiv b'meiser, and they have different halachas. Because we know that there's a halacha that all the while that the preparations of either the fruits or vegetables are not complete, then the chiyuv is not yet there to take the meisers, and one is allowed to actually snack, achilas aray, a non-permanent type of eating, a snack. You can't sit down for a proper meal, you can't take large quantities, but if you want to just snack at those fruits and vegetables before taking meiser, it's allowed. The question is, what marks the end of the preparation? So, Trei Gavna Yerek, there's two different types that none we learned in the Mishnah. Mishnah in Chulin, Yerek HaNe'egad, a type of vegetable that when it's prepared gets bundled up, Misha Yegad. All the while it's not bundled up, it's not yet considered as finished, as complete, and therefore you can eat it, you can snack from it. Once it's been Misha Yegad, once it's bundled, that's it, you can no longer snack from it until all the relevant trumas and meisos have been taken. V'she'enoi negad, but a type of vegetable that is not bundled together, then mishimale esekli, as soon as you've filled your container, your vessel, with those vegetables, then from that point on you're already chayev with trumas and meisos, and you're not allowed to snack on them until you've taken all the trumas and meisos. Continues the Gemara, Tanu Rabbanon. We learned in the Brisa, Likate Yerek be'erev Rosh Hashanah. If you picked, likate is picking, and different growths, different things that grow have a different point. So we know that the 1st of Tishri is the break-off point. Before Tishri is 1 year, after Tishri is another year. What actually has to happen before Rosh Hashanah to be called associated to last year? What has to happen after Rosh Hashanah to be considered next year's crop? So when it comes to vegetables, it's the picking. It doesn't matter how much grew when. When you pick this vegetable from the ground, the moment you pick, if it's before Rosh Hashanah, it's last year's. After Rosh Hashanah, it's next year's. And that is the determining factor of chiyuv meisus regarding yerokos, vegetables, is lekita, is picking. It's not for fruits, for example. It's different. And grains is different. We're going to learn about this extensively soon. But as far as yerokos is concerned, it's the lekita. So the Brisa says that likate yerek, if you pick some vegetables, erev Rosh Hashanah, before the 1st of Tishri, ad sheloi tovei hashemesh, before the night set in, before Rosh Hashanah. V'chozar v'likate, and he picked some more vegetables, different vegetables, misha tovei hashemesh, after the sun set, after the 1st of Tishri. Ein toirmin, you're not allowed to take truma or maisrin or maistrus mizeh al zeh, because they're considered 2 different years' crops, 2 different years' harvests. And this is called Yoshon, this is called Chodosh. you cannot take truma or maisrus one onto the other. And there's even more ramifications than just not being allowed to take truma from one crop to the other. There's even more than that. We know that there's a 7-year Shemitah cycle, year 7 marking Shemitah. The 6 years running up to Shemitah, the 6 years between one Shemitah and the next, are split up into 2 groups. Year 1, year 2, year 4 and year 5, then a person has to take truma, obviously. He has to take Meiser Rishon, given to the Levi, and Meiser Sheni, where the owners themselves have to take it to Yerushalayim. In year 3 and year 6, the truma stays the same. Meiser Rishon stays the same. But instead of Meiser Sheni, the owners have to give the Meiser to the Oni, to the poor people. Who are the poor people? It can be a Levi, a Yosem, an Almona, a Geir, a poor person. It's called Meiser Oni. So if you picked some vegetables on Erev Rosh Hashanah at the end of the 2nd year, and you picked some more vegetables on after that, let's say after Rosh Hashanah in the 3rd year, they might only be a couple of days apart. But the first crops you picked are subject to the 2nd year, which is Meiser Rishon and Meiser Sheni. The crops you picked after Rosh Hashanah are subject to Meiser Rishon and Meiser Oni. If it was the transition, the Rosh Hashanah was the transition between year 2 and year 3 of the Shemitah cycle, Shnio Meiser Rishon and Meiser Sheni, Shlishis Meiser Rishon and Meiser Oni. That's what it says in the Brisa. Asks the Gemara, Minoha Nemili, how do you know that in year 3 there's no Meiser Sheni? We know that there's, in the 3rd year, we know that there's Meiser Oni. It's a pasuk in the Torah. Ki sechale le'aser is called Masechet V'oscho bashono hashlishis shnas hameiser v'nosato la'levi la'ger la'yosem v'la'almona v'ochlu v'shorecho v'saveyu. So the fact that there is Meiser Oni in year 3 is a pasuk in the Torah. But who told you there's no Meiser Sheni? Maybe like there's Meiser Rishon every year, all 6 years, and Meiser Sheni in year 1, 2, 4, and 5. Maybe there's Meiser Sheni in year 3 and 6 as well. Omer B'Shua ben Levi, he's learning it from this pasuk. Ki sechale la'aser es kol Masechet V'oscho bashono hashlishis shnas hameiser. It says that it's a year of Meiser in single tense. V'nosato la'levi, you should give Meiser Oni. So the Gemara says it's shono she'ein bo elo Meiser echod. That 3rd year is a year with just one Meiser, not more. Okay, so which one Meiser is in this 3rd year? Meiser Rishon. Besides for Meiser Rishon, it's Meiser Oni. Meiser Oni is that one. We'll soon see who says there's Meiser Rishon, because there are 2. There's Meiser Rishon. But put Meiser Rishon aside. Besides for Meiser Rishon, there's only Meiser Oni. Or Meiser Sheni Yovatil. But Meiser Sheni that was practiced in year 1 and year 2, and in year 4 and 5, that doesn't apply in year 3 and 6. Asks the Gemara, maybe Shnas HaMeiser means there's only one Meiser in year 3 and 6, which is Meiser Oni. Maybe there isn't even Meiser Rishon. Says the Gemara, no. For that we have a different pasuk that tells us that Meiser Rishon is a constant. Talmud Leimar, it says in the pasuk, Ve'el haLeviim tedabir. So tell the Leviim, V'amar ta'aleim, ki sikchu me'is b'nei Yisrael es HaMeiser. When you will take from Klal Yisrael the Meiser, Asher nosati lochem, that I've given you, says Hashem, me'itom b'nachalaschem, so to speak, as an inheritage, v'hari moisem mimenu trumas Hashem Meiser min HaMeiser. That's another halacha to do with the Meisers the Leviim receive, that they themselves have to take 10% called trumas Meiser and give it to the Kohanim. But that just happens to be the end of the pasuk. That's not the topic of discussion now. So what do we learn from this pasuk? That we compare the Meiser Rishon, which the pasuk is talking about, to Nachalaschem, to an inheritance. Hikishu, we compare Hakosov leNachlo. The pasuk compares the Meiser to a Nachlo, to inheritance. Ma Nachlo ein lehefsek, af Meiser Rishon ein lehefsek. In the same way as inheritance is a constant, it's always there, it always continues, so too Meiser Rishon is a constant. It's every year of the 6 years of the Shemitah cycle. Tani Idoch, another brisa, coming to the same conclusion but learning it a little bit differently. That says in the pasuk, Yisachale la'aser is called Masechet V'oscho bashono hashlishis, the pasuk we mentioned before. Shnas HaMeiser shono she'ein bo elo Meiser echod. It's a year where there's only one Meiser of between Meiser Sheni and Meiser Oni. Only one of them are practiced, In year 3, it's only Maisa Oni, not Maisa Sheni. HaKetzad, Maisa Rishon or Maisa Oni, or Maisa Sheni Yevatil. The Brisa again asks, as we saw before, Yochilaf Maisa Rishon Nam Yevatil, maybe the 3rd year and the 6th year is only Maisa Oni, and not only is there no Maisa Rishon, not only is there no Maisa Sheni, there's also no Maisa Rishon. Talmud Leima, this Brisa learns it out from a different pasuk, not from the fact that the pasuk compares Maiser to a Nachlo, but to a different pasuk. The pasuk says, Uvo Alevi she'ein chelik v'nachlo imach, a Levi who doesn't receive an inheritance in Eretz Yisrael, he wasn't given any part of Eretz Yisrael. V'hager v'yosem v'almona asher b'sharecho v'ochlu v'soveu l'man yivrecha Hashem elekecha b'chol ma'is yodcha asher ta'aseh. So what does it say? Uvo Levi, that the Levi will come, and then the pasuk continues, because ki ein chelik v'nachlo, etc. So Ubo Levi means the Levi will come and take Ma'aser Rishon. Kol zman shebo tenloi. This is an instruction to Klal Yisrael. Whenever the Levi comes, any year, give him Ma'aser Rishon, which means year 3 and year 6, don't leave out Ma'aser Rishon. Ma'aser Rishon always applies. The fact that it says in year 3, Shnas HaMa'aser, there's only one Ma'aser, that's just to exclude Ma'aser Sheni, not to exclude Ma'aser Rishon. Divrei Rabbi Yehuda, that was the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov Omer, Einei Tzorich, I don't need to learn it from that pasuk. Harayu Omer, it already says in the pasuk, Ve'el halavim tedaber v'amarta aleim kisichu meis b'nei Yisrael es ha'maiser asher nosati lechem meitom b'nachalaschem. And here, this is Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov saying what it said in the first brisa. The proof that Ma'aser Rishon is a constant is from the fact that Tikishe HaKosav leNachlo, the Torah compares Ma'aser Rishon to Nachlo. Ma Nachlo ein lehefsek, in the same way as Nachlo has no interruption, is not broken up. Af Ma'aser Rishon ein lehefsek, so too Ma'aser Rishon is a constant, including year 3 and year 6. Continues the Gemara. We saw in the Brisa that we started with today that the Brisa says that the first of Tishri is the Rosh Hashanah, not only for Yorokis and Maestros we just discussed, but also for Nedorim. What does that mean? Says the Gemara, V'le Nedorim, Tanu Rabbanon, Hamoider ano mechaveri l'shono. If a person makes a neder and says, I am committed not to have any benefit from my friend for a year. How long is a year? Look at the calendar, and the same time, next year, a year has passed. But if he says l'shono zu for this year, which means that there's a certain series or a certain unit called a year, and we're in that year now, and I want to detach myself from my friend and be committed with a neder, not to have anah from him till the end of this year. When does this year end? Even if he says this on the 29th of Elul, the day before Rosh Hashanah, as soon as the 1st of Tishri arrives, also loishono, then this year, the year that he spoke about just the day before, is already come to an end, the year is over. And we already saw before in Daf Yud, there's a machlokes. Is one day considered a year, or is a month considered a year? Even according to the opinion that says that normally when you need a year, then one day is not sufficient, is not considered a year, is not called a shana, then over here he will agree that one day is enough. Why? Because he just took upon himself to inflict upon himself some challenge, some pain, some tsar, and therefore all he wanted was to feel that distance from his friend. And therefore, one day, and his goal had been reached by the fact that this one day, the neder was valid. Asks the Gemara, Ve'emen Nisan, what made you say that the 1st of Tishri is the end of this year regarding Nedorim? Maybe it's Nisan, as with other halachas we saw in our Mishnah on Daf Beis Amud Aleph. Answers the Gemara, you're right. In many aspects, the 1st of Nisan would be the beginning of the year. But B'Nedorim, when it comes to making a neder, this is something we're going to learn about extensively in Masechet Nedorim, that with Nedorim, it's all about the way people talk. People, when they make a neder, they want to be understood as in the accepted lingo. The way we talk, and people say, Rosh Hashanah, everyone knows. Ask every child, when's Rosh Hashanah? He won't tell you the 1st of Nisan, he'll tell you the 1st of Tishri. Since people call the 1st of Tishri Rosh Hashanah, then in context of Nedorim, we look at the Rosh Hashanah, the 1st of Tishri, as being the beginning of the next year. And in the next year, we're going to continue from here. We're going to go back to the halachas of Maisrus and discuss a little bit more the different points and halachas in Maiser.